I wanted to ask you about the latest after our exchanges on, I guess it was Tuesday, about the aid situation and this new UN Commission report that is very harshly critical of Israel. One, since Tuesday, have you seen anything that would make you think that they are now more in compliance with the criteria that were laid out in the letter? And number two, what do you think of this UN Commission's?
Let me get to the second part of your question first. As it relates to the UN Commission, I've seen some of that reporting, and we've seen some language coming out of that indicative of their belief that some of the actions could be constituted as, and this is their phrasing, genocide. That is something we would unequivocally disagree with. Again, we think that that kind of phrasing and those kinds of accusations are certainly unfounded. As it relates to the humanitarian situation, I laid out on Tuesday some of the steps that we have seen taken. We expect some additional steps to take place as well over the course of this week. Particularly, we anticipate that the IDF and COGAT may make some adjustments to the list of items, the dual-use items that would be allowed to be categorized within humanitarian aid. Certainly, progress in that space would build on the many things that I outlined the other day on Tuesday. And all in all, what we want to see is all of these things in their totality continue to contribute to an improvement in the humanitarian circumstances on the ground.
But they haven't done that yet.
That we expect a decision to be made on that sometime this week.
And there's still been no meeting of this civilian harm reduction.
That is my understanding. But again, these items were
October 31st, even before the last the deadline on Tuesday.
Certainly, our hope and our expectation is such an engagement happens as soon as possible. But ultimately, Matt, look, we talked a little bit about this the other day. We want to make sure that these kinds of efforts are sustained over an extended period of time. You and I and many others have had a fairly extensive back and forth on Tuesday about the contents of the original letter that Secretaries Blinken and Austin sent in October, but also the results that we're seeing on the ground. Obviously, colleagues in the humanitarian space had some perspectives and points of view on this and well. And I say all this to say that at the end of the day, we welcome criticism of the United States record. Certainly, we even welcome criticism of Israel's record when it's warranted. But certainly, it ultimately, at the end of the day, needs to be grounded in facts. And the facts are is that on many of the items that were outlined in this letter that was sent by the secretaries, we have seen progress and steps in the appropriate direction. What we need to see now is these kinds of events sustained over a significant period of time, and our hope is that through the significant progress steps that we've seen, that the operational space has been created to see an additional inflow of trucks, see an additional inflow of humanitarian aid, that all in all, contributing will hopefully help address the dire humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, you keep using the word hope and the words hope and expectation. It's just, at this point, it kind of sounds like, thoughts and prayers being offered for victims of tragedies. Which are you saying that all accusations against Israel are unfounded?
No, what I'm saying is the accusation of genocide, specifically in that UN commission, those accusations are unfounded. Also, in the point that I was making about criticism of Israel needing to be grounded in facts, our viewpoint is that some of the metrics that were outlined by some of these humanitarian groups in their scorecard release the other day are inconsistent with what we're seeing on the ground. And just some examples of that. That scorecard said that humanitarian aid had been cut off in the north. That is not accurate. Not accurate from our reporting and not accurate from our engagements with people in the region. Food and supplies had been delivered to Gaza City for weeks now, and last week we've also saw some progress in Jabalia and some of the surrounding areas. That scorecard had said that the Musawi humanitarian zone had not been expanded. Also not true. We have seen the humanitarian zone in Musawi expanded. So there are just some simple things like this that we think are inconsistent with the facts on the ground. That does not mean to say that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is perfect. It's not, as I said on Tuesday, but any criticism of the United States or Israel and our humanitarian undertaking absolutely needs to be grounded in the truth on the ground. And some of those metrics are inconsistent with what our colleagues and those who have been engaged on this deeply are seeing directly.
Well, I'm kind of surprised you want to get into metrics that are contained in the NGO report, since you absolutely refuse to get into your own metrics when you were asked about it numerous times on Tuesday. So,
we certainly were. There was no resistance to get into some of those metrics.
Let's get into the most basic metric, which was the number of trucks of aid going in every day. You said 350 was the bare minimum. What is it?
That certainly was the metric that was outlined in the letter. And as I said on Tuesday, the metric that we had as it related to between November 1st and November 9th, let me just pull up my notes. And I unfortunately don't have a more updated figure for you at this time, but the metric that we had seen between November 1st and November 9th was 404 trucks. Again, I don't say this to say that we are satisfied with that number. We certainly are not. And some of the changes that I outlined on Tuesday, the opening of new gates, the waiving of the customs requirement through the Jordanian corridor, some other measures, the hope is that the government of Israel, the UN, and other regional partners can utilize those changes to see an influx of trucks go in. That is what the United States certainly expects, and it's what we're going to continue to push for as well.
Thank you. Human Rights Watch said today that Israeli authorities have caused forced displacement of Palestinians in Gaza to an extent that constitutes war crimes and crimes against humanity. Have you seen anything that would make you agree with that assessment?
We have not. Certainly, forced displacement is something that continues to be inconsistent with the principles that Secretary Blinken laid out in Tokyo. And again, I will let our partners in the IDF speak to the specific military tactics and operations, but it is wholly consistent and acceptable to ask civilians to evacuate a certain area while they are conducting certain military operations, and then for them to be able to go home. We have not seen any kind of specific forced displacement, but as you've heard us say consistently, this is something that we're going to pay incredibly close attention to. And if we see actions that are not just inconsistent with that, but inconsistent with what is expected of our partners and expected of how we enforce U.S. law, we'll take appropriate action as well.
So you don't agree that there's been forced displacement to the extent that constitutes war crimes?
We have not made such an assessment.
And how can you say that you've not seen crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide, anything like that, if there's still assessments that are going on within the State Department?
What we have said is that these assessments are ongoing, and we've been very specific. We have not closed the door on necessarily coming to that conclusion. What we are talking about is that these are ongoing assessments, and we are going to continue to pay attention to the kinds of actions and behavior that we're seeing.
And can I ask on Lebanon?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Israel launched airstrikes on Beirut's Hezbollah-controlled southern suburbs today, keeping up its unusually intensive bombardment of the area for a third consecutive day. Lebanon's health ministry said Israeli attacks killed 21 yesterday. Do you have any concerns about these airstrikes? Does this hinder ceasefire efforts?
We certainly would have concerns. Look, you've heard us say time and time again that we do not want to see these kinds of consistent operations in Beirut, especially as it relates to densely populated areas. This is something that we're going to continue to stress with our partners in Israel. Ultimately here, Daphne, why we have been pressing so aggressively for a diplomatic resolution is because we want to see the conditions created that that allow for civilians on both sides of the blue line to be able to return home. And we also want to see UN Security Council 1701 effectively implemented, which would require Hezbollah to disarm and withdraw to north of the Litani River. Certainly, we have not seen that yet.
And just on that, a senior Lebanese official signaled that Hezbollah is ready to pull its forces away from the Lebanon-Israel border in any ceasefire, while rejecting Israel's demand for freedom to act against Hezbollah in Lebanon in the future. What do you make of this? How much of a sticking point is it at this point? And how can you resolve it?
I'm certainly not going to get into the specifics of the negotiations, Daphne, but consistent with 1701, of course, is that Israel is also required to withdraw to a certain point as well. But beyond that, let's not lose sight of the fact or forget that Hezbollah is a terrorist group, a terrorist actor, and certainly we would need to see some significant progress in the implementation of 1701 as part of this.
In addition to, or as part of this, they're pointing out that the large parts of Gaza are now completely uninhabitable because of the Israeli military campaigns. Does the State Department take issue with the facts behind that the military operation has done that?
Sean, I'm certainly not going to stand up here and dispute the fact that there has been damage done to civilian infrastructure and numerous civilian facilities across Gaza, and have certainly made some of them inhabitable. Ultimately, though, that is why one of the things that Secretary Blinken and others have been so deeply engaged on is finding an end to this conflict and ultimately pivoting to a conversation that is related to what happens the day after. And at the crux of that is what steps are we going to undertake to make sure that Gaza can rebuild, that it is no longer a springboard for terrorism against the Israeli people, that it is no longer under the control of Hamas. All of those things we think are vital.
And the I mean, you mentioned that there was, of course, damage done. The State Department acknowledges that to civilian infrastructure. How is that distinct from what Human Rights Watch is talking about? Their conclusion being that this amounts to crimes against humanity and, in their view, ethnic cleansing. Why do you dispute that?
So, I'm not going to get into the specifics of this of the report specifically. I haven't had the chance to read it in detail. It simply was asking Daphne's question if we agree with the conclusions that we've seen some kind of forced displacement, which we have not. That being said, that certainly would be a red line for the Secretary and certainly be a red line for us, which is something that we laid out pretty clearly in Tokyo almost a year ago. And those principles that the Secretary laid out in that speech continue to be the pillar of how we view the ongoing conflict, but ultimately what we want to see, what we want the building blocks of the day after to look like. We'll come back to you. Yeah. Go ahead, Said.
Thank you, Vedant. On the letter itself, I mean, 2 days after the deadline, whatever it is, do you consider the letter to be nullified, canceled, or fulfilled? The content of the letter. What is the status of the letter today?
Said, none of the above. I hope you were paying attention to the very extensive back and forth we had on this on Tuesday.
I asked the question, yeah.
The point of what we said was that these are issues that we're going to continue to pay close attention to. We're going to continue to make assessments on them. And should we see things that we believe are inconsistent of how we expect a major partner like Israel to conduct itself, we'll appropriately raise those things and will appropriately enforce and take action as it relates to U.S. law. Our intense focus and our close looking and our assessments of the humanitarian situation in Gaza did not start when the Secretary sent that letter. It did not end after that 30-day period. This is something that we have been intensely focused on, certainly in the context of this conflict since October 7th, but even more broadly, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is something that, of course, the United States has been deeply engaged on for many time before that.
I'm not asking a humanitarian question. I'm asking a technical question. The letter had a timeline. I mean, it had very specific things. That part of it, is that nullified? Is that over? Is that canceled? Is that shelved? What is it? The 30-day period, is it extended?
Said, the letter was designed to inject a strong sense of urgency and produce action, and we believe it has done that. We are now going to continue to remain engaged on this. And if we see actions that we think are detracting from these steps of progress, if we see actions that are inconsistent with the kinds of things that we want to see, we of course will appropriately make the relevant assessments that we need to make within U.S. law. The letter is not void, it is not null, it is not canceled.
Right.
The letter was it is one piece of the puzzle as it relates to how we are approaching the issue relating to the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Just one last thing on the issue of the letter, but the part that expired on the 12th of this month, is that over?
What part are you talking about, Said?
It had a definite time limit. That's
Said, there was
so that, I mean, I understand
it laid
can't
out
be renewable.
It laid out. I think you were focusing a little too intensely on the letter. It laid out some specific steps that.
It was the government.
Let me finish. Let me finish. It laid out some specific steps that we wanted to see. It laid out some progress areas that we wanted to see. We believe that we have seen some progress in some of those areas. We're going to continue to assess and see what happens. And if we see a detraction or steps backward as it relates to that progress, we'll take appropriate action. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so let me ask you about the number of trucks. You said 404 trucks entered since between November 1 and November 9. That is like 44 trucks a day. That's way below.
And in talking to Matt, I will echo what I said again. That number is incredibly and deeply unsatisfactory and certainly inconsistent with the goals that we've set out. But with the changes that have been made, the operational changes, some additional border crossings, some routes that have been opened up and repaired within Gaza, some changes that have been made to the Jordanian corridor, the work that is ongoing with our partners in Egypt and our partners in Israel relating to throughput and capacity issues at Kerem Shalom. Our goal and our hope is that we will be able to reach that number, and that's what we're going to continue to press for.
And you said that you disagree with the term genocide to describe what's going on in Gaza. I mean, you guys have done that time and again. Now we know that there are 44,000 dead as of now, at least what the Ministry of Health says from Gaza. The Lancet group says maybe 186,000. There are 10,000 under the rubble presumed dead and so on. Do you have a definition for what genocide is? Can you tell me what is the definition of the government of the United States of America in describing genocide?
Said, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to offer a legal definition for you.
Right.
What I can say, and what I'll reiterate again, is that the allegations of genocide we continue to believe are unfounded in the context of the ongoing conflict. Now, that certainly does not minimize the moral and strategic imperative and responsibility that our partners in Israel have to conduct their operations and conduct their activities with civilian protections in mind and taking every possible effort to minimize the impacts on civilians. And certainly it also calls into question Hamas's role in this, because time and time again we have found that Hamas has been resistant to this war coming to a close. They've been resistant to a ceasefire deal, a proposal. They have yet to, a number of hostages continue to remain in Gaza, including American citizens. And so certainly that is a component of this as well.
But let me understand you correctly. I mean, I'm not disputing any of what you're saying. I'm saying that the government of the United States does have a definition as to what genocide is. We've seen that.
It certainly does. It certainly does.
Many places.
I'm not a lawyer, so I don't have it. I don't have it for you. But again, what we would find those allegations to be unfounded.
Okay. Can you please get us the definition of the United States government?
I'm happy to.
Okay. I have a couple more questions if you allow me, and if my colleagues indulge me. I want to ask you about the West Bank.
Yeah.
There are growing restrictions, Israeli restrictions, that trap Palestinians, not only in Hebron, but in many other places. In fact, there are communities now that literally get locked in. I know you guys get offended at the term apartheid, but that's, when you lock people in and allow them out to go to school or work or anything like this, according to your own calendar. What do you call that? What is that? I mean, when you trap people, literally, you disallow them from, let's say, cultivating their olive trees, going to work, building their community, whatever. I mean, they are literally locked in. How do you describe that?
So, Said, first of all, it is not lost on this department and this administration how vital economic activity is to the West Bank being able to be viable and certainly being able to be sustained on its own. And things like the olive harvest and other economic endeavors, no doubt, are integral to that. In specific reports, as it relates to some of what you said relating to communities and villages, we're aware of those reports and we're asking our partners in Israel for more information. We are very concerned about these kinds of reportings and certainly are concerned about what that could mean for maintaining stability in the West Bank. We're going to continue to urge Israel to take all feasible measures to protect civilian lives in the West Bank, but not just protect civilian lives, allow for what is required so basic economic functions like you described are able to go about and happen unimpeded. We also recognize that there are very real security challenges that Israel faces, and it has a legitimate right to defend its people and its territory.
And finally, on UNRWA.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Lezer, the director of UNRWA, said that basically it is catastrophic. I mean, the agency is facing catastrophic end or consequences. I want to ask you, because I remember this, from way back in the 90s, when Congress imposed the transfer of the embassy, for instance, to Jerusalem. The President of the United States would go, every 6 months and have actually a waiver. So why cannot the President of the United States, in his last 2 months and a half, I guess, issue an executive action that would actually do the same thing to UNRWA, that would continue aid and allow it to function and help, although there is, a congressional legislation.
So, Said, I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals, and I certainly don't have any new policy or endeavor to announce. What we've stated before is that we continue to be deeply troubled by the passage of these bills in the Knesset, and we're going to continue along with other members of the international community to press upon the Israelis the ramifications of this bill being implemented. UNRWA has played a critical role in providing millions of Palestinians access to basic healthcare, basic education, food, and other essential services, and it's essential that there be no disruption to those services. As you heard me say on Tuesday, there continues to be about 2 months before that bill, we believe, is required to be implemented. So we're going to continue to press and raise this with our partners in the region, and it continues to be a top priority for us.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Doc. Harper. Dr. Harper.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Vidant.
Yeah.
I know you said on numerous occasions that UNRWA is an essential humanitarian organization that puts their lives on the line, delivering food, water, and medicine to Palestinians. My question is to you is, how can UNRWA be an essential humanitarian organization when they indoctrinate children in their schools to kill Jews and aid and abet Hamas to terrorize Israel? And a couple of quick follow-ups.
So I just don't think that characterization is true, Doctor. Certainly, we share concerns that Israel and others have that a small number of UNRWA's personnel were involved in the October 7th attacks, and that those may or may not have had ties to Hamas and other armed groups. We're also concerned that UNRWA's facilities may or may not have been, some of them, compromised by Hamas, which also we believe to be unacceptable. But let me be clear, the vast majority of the group and the vast majority of the people working within the organization, they play a critical role to providing life-saving aid to millions who need it. Daphne, go ahead.
Thank you. We're reporting from sources that the U.S. ambassador to Lebanon submitted a draft truce proposal to Lebanon's Speaker of Parliament today. Can you confirm this?
I don't have anything to offer on that from up here beyond just saying what we continue to remain deeply engaged and focused on is wanting to see a diplomatic resolution, one that will ultimately allow civilians on both sides of the blue line to be able to return home.
And has Israel given its okay on this proposal?
Again, I just don't have anything to offer as it relates to this proposal.